Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Perspectives in FTD Research Webinar Series, Amplifying Your Voice in FTD Research. Why am I asked so many questions? This webinar is being presented jointly by the Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration and the FTD Disorders Registry. My name is Dr. Diana Wheaton, and I'm the director of the FTD Disorders Registry. On behalf of everyone here, thank you for joining us. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Please note that our audience will be muted for the duration of the presentation portion. This helps to keep the background noise to a minimum so that everyone can hear the presenter clearly. If you have any technical issues, please write a message in the questions box and we will try to address them with you. There will be time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. If you have a question for one of the presenters, type it into the questions box when you think of it. You don't need to wait until the end of the presentation to submit your question. We will answer as many of them as time permits. Additionally, this webinar will be recorded and archived for later viewing on both AFTD's YouTube page and the FTD Registry's YouTube page. As I mentioned, I am the director of the FTD Disorders Registry. The registry is a powerful tool in the movement to discover treatments and a cure for FTD. It relies on the stories of people like you, persons diagnosed with FTD, caregivers, both current and former, family members, and friends. Your stories and experiences will help to spur innovation that will lead to effective treatments and therapies. If FTD has touched your life in some way, I strongly encourage you to join the thousands of people who have already signed up for the registry. Registration allows you to receive periodic news and FTD research updates by email, as well as notifications to participate in surveys and research studies to help further the science of FTD. Just a reminder, the AFTD's annual education conference will be Friday, April 8th. And will feature the latest information on FTD science and caregiving, as well as the opportunity to connect with others on the FTD journey. This will be a hybrid event taking place simultaneously in person at the BWI Airport Marriott near Baltimore, Maryland, as well as online via live stream. AFTD will ask all in-person attendees to show proof of vaccination. Registration closes next week. So be sure to sign up today if you want to attend either virtually or in person. To learn more, visit vaftd.org/education-conference-2022. Before I introduce our presenters, I would like to ask our audience a question. You can answer by clicking the response that best matches your feelings. Would you consider taking part in FTD research in the future? You can choose definitely, maybe, or not sure, no, or I've already taken part in FTD research. I'll give everyone a few seconds to respond. Okay. And so we will thank you for having taken time to answer those questions. And the responses are that 50% of individuals indicated that they would definitely be willing to participate. 29% maybe, 3% no, 18% said they already have. So I thank you all, and we will give you an additional chance at the end of the webinar to also respond. So at this point, let me introduce today's presenters. Dr. Shana Dodge is AFTD's Director of Research Engagement. A licensed clinical psychologist, she holds a PhD in clinical psychology for the University of Hawaii, an MA in psychology from the New School, and a BA in psychology from George Washington University. Dr. Dodge has research and clinical experience in cognitive therapy and remediation, early detection of psychiatric conditions, and serious mental illness. Previously, she worked for SAIC, a contractor for the Department of Defense, supporting program evaluation and change management of more than 200 military health programs. Lakeisha Vincent is Registry Manager at the FTD Disorders Registry. She received a Master of Public Health from Walden University and a Master Certified Health Education Specialist from the National Commission for Health Education Credentialing. She is a dedicated public health professional with 10 years of experience in program design, implementation, health promotion, and education. Her experiences have focused on intersecting public health education and clinical research to enhance and impact individuals across the continuum of health. As Registry Manager, Lakeisha is responsible for supporting the strategic development, implementation, and daily operations of the registry. She works directly with registry participants and facilitates access to advocacy organizations and FTD resources. Finally, Jari Larson is part of the FTD community, both personally and professionally. He is a licensed clinical neuropsychologist in California, where he works at a major university teaching hospital doing a geriatric neurology cognitive clinic with underserved populations, as well as in an electrophysiology lab. He currently is on the AFTD Board of Directors and is a past president of the registry. He has multiple relatives who have been diagnosed with FTD due to the progranulin mutation, mostly behavioral variant, but also with language and motor issues. All of his siblings and many of his cousins have participated in research, and as a biological family member, Jari also has participated in at least 7 different FTD research studies and answered multiple surveys since 2007. Welcome to you all. And now I will turn things over to Dr. Shana Dodge.
Thank you, Dr. Wheaton, and good afternoon, everyone. We're going to be talking today about the numerous questions that people are asked as they navigate FTD research and the connection between all of these questions that you're asked and scientific progress towards treatments and hopefully a cure for FTD. And I wanted to start off by briefly addressing why we conduct FTD research at all. As many of you know, there is a great unmet medical need for people with FTD and their loved ones. Currently, there are no FDA-approved therapies for either symptoms or to modify the disease itself. So research is important to discover and test potential therapies. And those therapies can include medication, supports such as occupational, speech, and talk therapies, diet and exercise, and other interventions. Next slide. So we know why we need to conduct research, but why do people choose to volunteer to participate in FTD research and other types of research? Next. Here's what we've heard from people who have participated, and we hope we'll hear a little bit more about this from Jari at the end of this webinar. People report that participating in research often helps them learn more about their condition or the condition of their loved one. Next. People report that participating in research can allow them to feel like they're taking a more active role in their treatment. Some people are able to access interventions, specialists, or assessments that might not be typically available to them in their normal course of treatment. Next. Of course, participating in research helps everyone better understand FTD. Next. In particular, as many of you are very well aware, we need to improve the way that we diagnose FTD, and research is one way that we can get closer to more accurate diagnoses. Next. And ultimately, people often report that they participate in research in the hopes that it will lead to potential treatments, if not for themselves, then for future generations. Next. It's important to note that the journey from participating in research, from answering all of these questions, to available medication is long and complex. Some studies point to it taking about 17 years for research evidence to actually reach clinical practice for those medications to be available on the market. Next. And the reason is because it's a very complex process. Briefly, drug development goes through several phases. Begins with discovery and development, where research is done in a lab to discover and test promising new chemical compounds. The next phase is preclinical research, where laboratory and animal testing are conducted on the compounds to answer basic questions about safety. We then move on to clinical research, which many of you may be already familiar with. This is where safety and effectiveness of those chemical compounds are examined by testing on human beings through different phases that involve increasing number of volunteer participants. Government agencies thoroughly review and examine data related to the compound to decide on its approval. And finally, drug safety is continually monitored once it's available for use by the public. But as you can see through these arrows, in reality, it's not always a linear process. What we learn from one stage might feed earlier stages. So for example, the FDA review or the government review may bring up new research questions that may lead to additional steps in discovery and development, preclinical and clinical research. Next slide. However, across all of those phases in drug development, there's been an increasing understanding of the value of hearing from people diagnosed and their loved ones when it comes to conducting research and developing new therapies. Next, here are some of the ways in which the questions that you're asked as part of research or as part of surveys can inform the drug development process. Next. People with lived experience of FTD are uniquely positioned to help us understand how FTD progresses and changes over time. And this is why some research studies and some surveys may ask you the same questions over time so that we can understand how FTD is changing. Next. People with FTD and their loved ones can also help drug developers decide which symptoms are most important to treat and help us determine what makes something effective. How do we measure that? How do we know that something has been effective for someone? Next. Similarly, people with lived experience can help us understand how FTD differs between different people. Next. The people who may participate in research are also the ones who can best inform researchers how to make research participation easier and what types of study designs, for example, being able to participate remotely from home, are going to be the most appropriate for people with FTD and their loved ones. Next. And finally, the FDA also values input from people with lived experience when it comes to decisions that they need to make about approving drugs, deciding who and what the drugs will be approved for, and weighing the risks and benefits of new treatments. Next. To further our understanding of FTD and bring some of that information to the FDA, AFTD worked with the FDA to convene what's called a patient-focused drug development meeting. And because it was hosted by AFTD, we call this an externally led patient-focused drug development meeting, or EL-PFDD. This was held virtually last March, so we are celebrating the 1-year anniversary. And this is a mechanism to help inform the FDA about future treatments and to allow them to hear directly from people impacted from a disease or a disorder. And at AFTD's EL-PFDD meeting, people directly impacted by FTD were able to provide testimonials, participate in panel discussions. We had live callers, there was live commentary and live polling. Next. This meeting had more than 550 participants, including nearly 50 persons diagnosed, 171 professionals, including FDA staff. And the topics covered in this meeting included things like the diagnostic journey, the first symptoms that people experienced, what they find most concerning, experiences with attempting treatments, and attitudes towards future research, genetic testing, and hopes for future treatments. Next. In conjunction and to supplement the information that was heard during that meeting, AFTD collaborated with the FTD Disorders Registry for the development of the FTD Insight Survey, because the registry is such a powerful source of information on the lived experience of FTD. And this survey had nearly 1,800 complete responses, And many of these questions mirrored the topics that appeared during the EL-PFDD meeting, things like diagnostic journey and what people's hopes are for future treatments. Next. The majority of respondents on this survey were care partners, but family members and persons diagnosed also participated. Next. So there were some key themes that appeared both in the EL-PFDD meeting and the FTD Insight Survey. Next. One overarching theme was the devastating impact of FTD and the wide range of symptoms people reported experiencing, from thinking, behavior, language, to memory, mood, eating, drinking, sleep, motor functioning, hallucinations and delusions. People were really experiencing symptoms across the human experience. However, across that range, there were reports of challenges of the impact of these symptoms on activities of daily living, both inside and outside the home. Next. A lot of people reported difficulty obtaining a reliable FTD diagnosis, with more than half of the FTD survey respondents saying they needed to see more than 3 doctors before an accurate diagnosis was given. Next. There were some subset of respondents with a family history of FTD who reported specific challenges associated with that, including whether or not to undergo genetic testing, especially considering some of the advances in the last few years with options of participating in research for people with specific genetic variants associated with FTD. Next. There was a lot of frustration with the lack of effective, currently available treatments, with many current treatments producing side effects or not being very impactful. Next. Overall, there was an overwhelming desire to participate in research to advance treatment options, although some people pointed to some procedures and trial designs that can make participating in research challenging. Next slide. Next. So the information from the EL-PFDD meeting, as well as the FTD Insight Survey, was summarized in a document that the FDA requests called the Voice of the Patient Report, and this can be found on the AFTD website. Next. So how is AFTD and the FTD Disorders Registry using the information that you and people like you provided during the EL-PFDD meeting and the FTD Insight Survey to help advance the science towards a cure? Next. Next. Well, for one, we're taking the information from the meeting and the survey and presenting that to people that conduct FTD research so that they can determine the best ways to measure change and make sure that research is being conducted in a way with the lived experience of FTD in mind. Next. AFTD hosted the FTD Treatment Study Group meeting this past December, which included participants from the FDA, pharmaceutical companies, and academic researchers. And we took that as an opportunity to share the key takeaways from the meeting and the Insight Survey with all of these key stakeholders. Next. AFTD and the FTD Disorders Registry are also informing research and clinical professionals through publishing this data in peer-reviewed articles, as well as presentations at conferences, so that people that conduct research and clinical practice can be even more informed about the lived experience of FTD. Next. And as I mentioned in a previous slide, the Voice of the Patient Report is now a document that outlines the lived experience of FTD and can serve as a source of data for the FDA when it comes to making decisions about new treatments. Next. Next. So to summarize, AFTD and the FTD Disorders Registry are aligned in wanting to empower the voice of the community. Next. Part of both of our joint missions are to make sure that what matters to you is understood by researchers. Next. We all believe research should be conducted in a way that's accessible and aligned with the priorities of people directly impacted by FTD. Next. And we believe that you have the right to make informed decisions about participating in research. Next. Thank you, and I will now turn things over to Lakeisha Vincent of the FTD Disorders Registry.
Greetings all. As the registry manager, I am excited to be a part of this webinar and assist in helping you to understand why you are asked so many questions in research. It is my goal to link the importance of answering questions, not just on our surveys and questionnaires, but by sharing your story in all levels of research and clinical trials. Okay, next slide. The FTD Disorders Registry is a secure online database that brings together the FTD community. It creates a special place where you can share your unique story by answering questions about your experiences with FTD. Each and every question answered help us to understand FTD. It supports the development of new treatments. The registry is designed to provide an ongoing way to collect data, inform research, and give participants a voice. Next slide, please. Contact and research are the two levels of participation in our registry. On both levels, you will answer questions and enter basic information like demographics, your name, current address, and phone number. You will also answer questions that collect more in-depth information, including your date of birth, your legal name, city, and country of birth. The answers to these questions allow us to assign a global unique identifier, which is commonly known as a GUID. A GUID is a special code that protects your identity in research studies. The contact registry allows international participation and gives access to quarterly newsletters and FTD informational updates. The research registry is available to the US and some Canadian participants. It requires an informed consent, and you must answer questions to show understanding of your rights as a research participant. Signing up for research gives you access to registry surveys once your profile is complete. Next slide, please. Registry research tools primarily rely on surveys and questionnaires. The registry has created 3 intake surveys. The demographic survey asks questions about basic information such as diagnosis, gender, race, and your geographical location. The research readiness survey questions are designed to measure your willingness to participate in research studies and clinical trials. The disease impact survey allows you to share your lived experiences with FTD. To complete a research registry profile, all surveys must be completed, after which a participant can receive targeted information about research studies. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide is an example of how the registry used participant data in the past. The section of the poster, which you see on the left side, it was used to display and highlight the impact of FTD from data collected via registry surveys. The infographic shown on the right is another way to present data to the public. It is a picture form of sharing information, which makes it much easier to understand research results. By showing research motivation, willingness to participate, and ideal ways to receive study information, we use all of your survey answers to relay what is important to you in research studies. Your survey responses also help others to understand how this disease affects you on a daily basis, which directly impact how changes are made. A past poster that was shared with the scientific community included the Alzheimer's Association International Conference, which was summer of 2021. Future uses of posters that would be done this year, 2022, is the American Academy of Neurology meeting, which will be held next month. And we will also present again at the 2022 Alzheimer's Association International Conference this July. Data that has been shared with the lay community includes a research readiness newsletter article in 2020, infographics that has been shared annually at the AFTD education conferences, and enrollment graphics that's posted monthly on social media and quarterly in the registry newsletters. Next slide, please. Data privacy and confidentiality is our utmost concern. When you share your information via the registration process, surveys, and questionnaires, we take numerous steps to protect not only data integrity, but more important, your privacy. The data collected from the many questions we ask is de-identified and shared with researchers to learn more about FTD. That means all of your personal information is removed from the data and no one can identify you from the answers that you submit. Next slide, please. As a registry participant, you will answer many questions that request information about you and your loved ones. It is important to remember that the registry has a HIPAA-compliant database that keeps all of your information confidential. Another way your data is protected is through the use of a global unique identifier. As you may remember from the earlier slide, this is called a GUID. This special code is used to replace your name and any other identifying information, which protects your privacy and prevent anyone from knowing who you are in research studies and clinical trials. Our team uses de-identified data to share information in newsletters, publications, and on the registry's website. Next slide, please. All of the registry surveys and questionnaires are designed to provide a clear picture of FTD through the participants' daily experiences. As the data is continuously collected, this new information affects research and helps to ask better questions, which can be used as measures in future studies. The data can facilitate recruitment through the assessment of research and clinical trial feasibility. Lastly, the answers to your survey questions can raise awareness needed and promote advocacy within the FTD community. Next slide, please. While our staff work effortlessly to keep the registry going on a day-to-day basis, it is the participants who are the true treasures that allow us to complete our mission by sharing their stories. Today, the registry has more than 5,000 participants who are helping us to learn more about FTD. Of those registrants, 45% has made the decision to participate in research and answer numerous questions that impact the standard of care and help others on their FTD journey. The picture you see here is another example of an infographic and how the data is shared with the public. As you can see, there's no way to determine whose information was used in this data. Next slide, please. In our registry, research participation is optional. However, we encourage everyone to participate if eligible. We are committed to empowering you to share your FTD story with impact. We take strides on a daily basis to ensure your voice is heard in all levels of research and clinical trials. No matter where you are on your FTD journey, your perspective matters to us. Every survey question leads to a story. Every story advances the science. I hope we get a chance to hear yours. Together, we can make a difference. Next slide, please. Participation has the power to make a difference. Tell your story. Thank you. And right, Diana back. There we go.
Thank you, Lakeisha. And now I'd like to welcome Jari. And I have several questions for you today. And so first, what types of research studies have you and your family participated in?
So thank you very much, first of all, Dr. Wheaton, for having me today. I think it's really important to be having these conversations about research opportunities. So all the studies that I personally have participated in have been longitudinal natural history studies, meaning that they are observational studies that follow the course of a disease in individuals to better understand how a disease develops and how it may be treated. All the studies in which I have been enrolled have included both family members who are mutation positive as well as mutation negative carriers as well. One does not need to know their genetic status to participate in any of these studies. And I think, as I'd mentioned before, I participated in at least 7 different FTD studies. I'm not sure that I remember all of them. The very first one was one at Mayo Clinic. It was actually just considered a dementia study, and we got involved in that when my brother initially was diagnosed with a very early onset dementia, and that was right around the same time that Mike Hutton's group identified the progranulin mutation at Mayo Jacksonville. Shortly thereafter, my family got involved with 2 studies at the University of Pennsylvania. And with those studies, not only were there blood draws, but there was also the neuropsychological assessment, MRI, and a lot of questionnaires, both with the individual who was participating as well as with a care partner. Later on, we enrolled in what was called lefties, or the longitudinal evaluation of frontotemporal dementia subjects, and that eventually was rolled into the all FTD study, and we have been participating in that as well. Also, I obviously have participated in all of the research through the registry, and thanks to the registry for doing all of that. As far as interventional studies are concerned, I personally do not know if any of my family are participating in any of the interventional studies. For progranulin, there are actually a number of clinical trials that are underway. The registry has been very, very active in trying to let people know about these various clinical trials that are out there. And I would encourage people who are interested in any of these clinical trials to follow up with the registry or with other individuals who are in the know. Thank you.
All right. In what situations have you been asked to answer questions? And if you wish, you can actually elaborate on specific questionnaires or surveys.
Yeah, so I have been asked to fill out multiple questionnaires over the years. It feels very, very repetitive, but I also understand how important it is to be asking this information on an annual basis. By asking the same questions on a regular basis, it's really, really possible to track how things are going for both the individual who may be impacted by FTD, as well as the information that is collected from the care partners. So I have been asked a lot of questions about lifestyle, especially diet, exercise, alcohol use. Some of these questions have been paper pencil, some of them have been done on tablets, some of them are online. And there's also always a lot of questions about activities of daily living. Those are really the basic things that people have to do, like, can you feed yourself? Can you toilet yourself? The basic things for caring for yourself, as well as asking questions about independent activities of daily living. So higher level stuff, and being able to manage a budget and pay bills on time and all of that other stuff. So I've been asked those questions over the years. In addition, because of the symptomatology associated with FTD, it's not uncommon for individuals to have signs or symptoms that might be considered more psychiatric in nature. And so there have been a lot of questions about whether one has experienced any type of delusions, hallucinations. Has there been new onset of depression or anxiety? Is there apathy or irritability, agitation, disinhibition? And all of that, especially apathy, irritability, agitation, disinhibition, very important for the behavioral variants of FTD. Also, there's a lot of times questions about communication efficacy. And for the language variants of FTD, the communication efficacy plays a very important role. Also, empathy scales have been asked. We've been both for me as well as care partner, questions about empathy. And again, because empathy or a lack of empathy often is one of the issues that comes up with behavioral variant, it's really important to be asking these questions on a regular basis. I've also been asked about any change in movement issues or movement disorders, anything like that, as well as sleep problems. And I think that I always appreciate getting asked about sleep issues, because if there are significant changes with sleep, that can also be suggestive that there are changes going on with a neurodegenerative process. So thank you.
What question or questions are you asked that you don't like to answer, or have seen your answers actually be helpful?
Well, I guess what I would say is the one question I'm frequently asked over and over again is if I've been tested for progranulin. And I think it's most interesting when I am asked this question by individuals who 14 years ago highly recommended that testing not be done. I really would appreciate there being more of a discussion about genetic testing and what it means and what it doesn't mean, and to really focus on how important it can be to empower people if there is genetic testing. And so that's one of the questions that I'm asked frequently, which I find interesting. And then as far as any of the other questions, I've always really welcomed almost all of the other questions, because again, it is a way of tracking change over time. And it's really important to be able to track that change over time to establish if there is clinically meaningful change that is going on with the individual. So I am happy to respond to those questions. And more importantly, I'm very, very happy to have somebody else who is evaluating me. So a care partner who is weighing in on how they see me.
Okay, very good. How have you seen your answers to questions affect study design or change the research thought processes?
I'm not sure that my specific responses have changed study design. I definitely have not been shy about providing feedback about specific types of questionnaires or any type of experimental measures, partly because it's what I do for a living. But I do think that there are a lot of really, really good papers that are coming out, especially out from the All-FTD group, looking at how people, how people's lifestyles can actually impact the course of the disease, and that those people who are much more active both physically and intellectually, that it can really moderate the clinical outcomes for FTD in mutation carriers.
What would you say to a person who is frustrated with being asked so many questions?
Well, what I say and what I have said to my family is we are really, really lucky to have these natural history studies. And being asked these questions is part of the natural history studies. What's really nice about the natural history studies is there is no intervention. And so if people don't want to be involved in the intervention, they don't have to be, but it just follows people over time. And these questionnaires are part of that. We are so lucky to have these studies that are being funded both by the National Institutes of Health as well as by different organizations, especially the AFTD. We're lucky to do that. And I think that for any of us that are participating, I welcome the opportunity to complete these questionnaires on a regular basis. Yes, it may feel a bit repetitive, but things change over time. And what we're really looking for is that significant clinical change and how that is impacting somebody.
Okay. Jari, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Now I would like to supplement all the wonderful information provided so far by sharing an assortment of research resources. Okay. So first, a selection of general research participation information. These resources provide information about the research process, including types of research, participant rights, and the value of participation. Examples of these types of resources are the FTD Registry Participating in Research webpage and newsletters, the AFTD Clinical Trials webpage, the National Institutes of Health, NIH Clinical Center website, and the National Institute on Aging Clinical Trials webpage. Next slide. I would like to highlight the FTD Disorders Registry as a key resource. The registry not only provides online informational and educational support to promote FTD research, but also actively facilitates enrollment in research studies, either directly through the registry or by referral to external projects. You can find featured study listings on the registry's Find a Study webpage. For those individuals enrolled in the research arm of the registry, targeted emails are sent directly to you for studies that you may match. The registry currently supports 18 research partners. Quarterly newsletters and other resources help round out research promotion about FTD researchers and study opportunities. Next slide. Other resources to find study opportunities include your clinician and study trial finder search tools. Many clinical sites participate in FTD research or may be able to connect you to others. Make your clinician aware that you are willing and motivated to participate. The AFTD Featured Studies webpage is another resource for finding FTD studies that are currently enrolling. The clinicaltrials.gov and alzheimers.gov websites offer search tools that allow you to select certain criteria to refine your search, for example, by disease type and geographic location. Now we will take questions from the audience. Shana, Lakeisha, and Jari can rejoin us for this portion. To the audience, please use the questions box to enter your questions, and we will answer as many as time permits. Okay. And while we wait for some questions to roll in, I would like to remind everyone again about the upcoming AFTD Education Conference. There will be many wonderful speakers in attendance, and so we highly encourage you, if you haven't already registered, to please do so. It's a wonderful opportunity. And I will, since I posed several targeted questions specifically to Jari, I'm going to kind of roll back around and ask him a question directly. about his experience interacting with the FTD Disorders Registry and what that experience has been like.
I think working with the registry has actually been a really wonderful experience. What I will say is that I first, although I knew about FTD, it was when my brother was first starting to have some really significant problems in 2006, and I contacted Mayo Clinic to get him seen there, that I really began to learn how little was known about FTD and how difficult it was to get hooked up with research facilities that provided FTD evaluations as well as being involved in research. The registry actually has taken a lot of this history and it's a wonderful place for everything to be put in one place. I spent hours on the telephone, emailing, all of these various things that one goes through to try to find appropriate places for my brother and for my family to be engaged in research. It was not an easy process, and now the registry is one-stop shopping. This is a wonderful, wonderful advancement from where things were 15 years ago. So thank you to the registry for doing everything that you do.
Thank you, Jari. Okay, I'm going to ask this question of Shana. Does FTD have variants that tend to be genetic?
Thanks, Diana. So our understanding right now is that about 40% of people with FTD have a familial version of FTD, meaning that there's more than one affected family member. And the majority of people with a known genetic cause have familial FTD. However, there are about 60% of people with FTD who have apparent sporadic versions of FTD, meaning that they have no affected family members. There are 3 genes that are most commonly associated with FTD, variants in these genes. One is called the C9orf72 gene, another one, the progranulin gene that Jari mentioned, and the MAPT gene. And there is more information on both the AFTD website as well as the FTD Disorders Registry website to learn a little bit more about the role of genetics in FTD and to determine whether genetic counseling and potentially testing would be appropriate for you or your family.
Okay, thank you. And again, Shana, do you have to have an FTD diagnosis to participate in research?
That's a great question. Research right now, there are so many opportunities. Of course, there are research opportunities for people with an FTD diagnosis. However, there are also opportunities for care partners of people with FTD, family members, even friends to participate in research. And there are a lot of different types of research opportunities, from joining the registry and completing surveys all the way to clinical trials. So we encourage anyone who thinks they may be interested in learning about research opportunities to join the registry so that you can learn more about these various opportunities.
And if I may add something here, and I apologize for interrupting, for families where there is a genetic component, for individuals who have tested negative and therefore know that they will not develop FTD, they still really should be asking about engagement in research, because for all of these studies, not only do they need individuals who have been diagnosed, but they also need what we would call healthy controls. And the best healthy controls are the ones where there is a lot of genetic overlap and where there is also socioeconomic overlap and other types of overlap. And the best ways of getting that is from family members. So having entire families participate in research is absolutely wonderful. And it's the best thing from a scientific perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. So I have a question which I'm going to field as a genetic counselor. We have a question about genetic testing, and this is coming from someone who has a family history of FTD PPA, who is the offspring of an individual with that diagnosis, and they're wanting to know if they themselves should have genetic testing done as part of a research program, and if so, would that affect their health coverage in the future? And I know this is a recurring concern of many, and so, and there's several things built into this question, between it saying that as testing as part of a research program or testing done as part of clinical diagnostic testing at their clinician's office. So there's a number of things nested in this question. The response really is to have a very candid discussion with a genetic counselor in advance of genetic testing, and that's called pre-test genetic counseling. And that counselor can help answer these questions for you and determine if there are certain things that you need to do in advance of ordering that testing to perhaps protect all of your insurance, current and future. We are supposed to have protections in place through the GINA, to which our genetic background is not to be in any manner held against us for insurance purposes or other issues, but just to air all of the different potential issues. The genetic counselor is well versed in being able to advise you appropriately, but that would be my recommendation, because it's a very common question for individuals to have. Okay, another question, and it can be kind of open to who wants to answer this, but if a loved one is in later stages of behavioral variant FTD, where he can still speak but may not give correct answers, is it worth it to be involved in the registry? So who wants to field that one? Okay, Lakeisha. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, I'll start by reiterating what I said in my presentation. No matter where you are on your FTD journey, your perspective matters to us. Every story advances the science. So if someone is affected by FTD and they're not able to give the correct answers, that may mean that the caregiver or the loved one can participate on that person's behalf. So that means that you're sharing the story for them. Every story is important. So don't feel that whatever stages you're in, there's a possibility that your story is not going to advance the science. We value all stories. So just kind of weigh that out and just determine which loved one can participate on that person's behalf, and let us know, call us.
Okay, does anybody have anything else they want to add? That's a wonderful answer. Thank you, Lakeisha.
I just wanted to add, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jari.
I was just going to say, I would just echo everything that Lakeisha just said. And part of this is that when an individual is participating in research, there is under most circumstances, there is that care partner that is also participating in research. And those data are just as important as the data from the individual who has been diagnosed. So the answer is yes, please do participate in registry research, regardless of where the individual is. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so this will be our last question. And let's see, how are modern techniques for patient questionnaires being used? And maybe Shayna is kind of the closest to this, but Jari could probably weigh in too. Or the whole panel can, and they could go one by one through each of you as we finish out.
I guess I would just say that, yeah, there are a lot of different ways of participating in research now, from the traditional studies that require you to go into a medical center or a doctor's office, all the way to research studies that don't require you to leave your home at all. And getting involved in the registry and looking at the AFTD featured studies page, you will see some opportunities to participate using smartphone applications, via Zoom. There's all sorts of remote opportunities, and that's something that AFTD is really interested in, better understanding how some of these other ways of conducting research can be a little more accessible for people.
Yes, absolutely. One of the studies I'm participating in right now is a remote cognition study that's being done on my mobile. There's been a little bit of a learning curve there, but it definitely is changing the way that research is done, and also I think it's also meeting individuals where they are. As we know, there are a lot of families with FTD who live in parts of the country where it is not easy to get to a major medical center or to get to an academic center where there is established research through all FTD, and being able to do this stuff remotely really helps. Also, for people who are sicker or further along in their journey, traveling can sometimes be quite difficult, and so being able to continue to participate in research through some sort of a remote process is always a great opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's all the time that we have for today, and thanks to the audience for all the wonderful questions they submitted, and thank you, Jari, Lakeisha, and Shana for being with us today. Before we go, let's revisit the polling question. Would you consider taking part in FTD research in the future? Again, I'll give everyone just a few seconds to respond. And in the meantime, I hope you found this presentation to be informative. As a reminder, the webinar has been recorded, and you'll be able to find it on both the AFTD and FTD Disorders Registry's websites and YouTube channels in the coming days. The final outcome of the poll was 70%, so definitely they would be interested in participating in research. 18% maybe, 0 no, and 12 said they already did, 12% already did. Now, finally, a word about the next webinar in this series. We're currently planning the next Perspectives in FTD Research webinar, which is scheduled for this summer. So stay tuned to both the registry and AFTD on social media for more information as it becomes available. Most of all, thank you for joining us. Please let us know if you have any comments or questions about today's presentation. If you have any further questions for FTD, about FTD, you can contact AFTD's helpline at 866-507-7222 or by emailing info@theaftd.org. And be sure to sign up for the FTD Disorders Registry if you haven't already. Visit ftdregistry.org to learn more. Thank you so much.